This is John Ruff, and he offered to come and talk about the diary of Takuichi Fujii, who lived in Chicago and was in Minidoka. So he's an Issei person. And of course, I'm always interested in any Chicago Japanese American artist, especially if they're from camp, right? So I took him up on it. Okay, but before I do that, I want to introduce Stephen. Do you want to say a couple words, Stephen?
Sure.
He's the dean of the library here, and he has a 30-year career. And he's worked at the University of Nevada, Reno. But we're fortunate in having a top person at the library who's willing to support Japanese American and Asian American programs. So he's permitted us to house the Redress website here. So everyone has access to the testimonies as well as to other Japanese American materials.
We kind of got into that with a lot of help from Alice, but our prior university archivist had unearthed these documents about the redress hearings that were held on this campus in the 1980s. And we've kind of just been building our Japanese American collection since then. And if you go to the library website, you can click on the link that says support the libraries and you can contribute to that activity. I think that's all I have to say.
Then I'm going to introduce John Ruff. So John wrote me a letter, November 9th, 2023, on the recommendation of Lawson Inada, who gave him my address. John was a poetry student of Inada's in Southern Oregon State in the early 1980s. It was during that time that he became familiar with incarceration and Asian American literature. John was born and raised in Minneapolis. He attended Catholic elementary, high schools, and colleges. He completed a master's degree in teaching from the College of St. Thomas, and then taught elementary school for 3 years in Rome and high school in Oregon for 4 years. Then he went on to earn a master's degree in creative writing and PhD in literature from the University of Washington. Returning to the Midwest, he has worked at Valparaiso University from 1989 until he retired in 2022. He teaches things like Asian American literature and American literatures of immigration and migration. Currently, he continues to teach as a senior research professor and does volunteer work for the Brauer Museum of Art. His research is focused on developing a new course on Latin writers and on the art diary of Takuichi Fujii. John's wife, Gloria, where's Gloria? There's Gloria, okay. She's with us today, and she's an associate curator at that university. Through a grant from an Asian network, they brought in Sandy Kita, an expert on Japanese art history. He wanted him to evaluate the collection of their Japanese prints and to advise on the purchase of Japanese art. She introduced Sandy and John, and they shared common interests. Sandy Kita told John about his grandfather's diary, and with John's interest, Sandy gave him a Xerox copy and encouraged him to write about it and to use it in his teaching. I'm not going to talk anything about Fujii diary. I'm going to leave it to John. Lawson urged him to get the word out about Fujii in Chicago because this is where he and his family lived. Of course, we're very interested in anything Japanese American who lived here and whose art was done in camp. John has an extensive resume, but I'm only presenting a small portion of it. He has taught students of all ages, published poems, written many articles, and won many awards. Here is John Ruff to share his slide presentation, Drawing Breath from Minidoka, the art diary of Takuichi Fujii. I want you to learn about how it was discovered and John's extensive work on him, including his pilgrimages to Minidoka, where you can view the Fujii exhibit, read a book about him, see productions of his prints, and what has been and is happening now with his collection currently. After he's finished with his presentation, you have opportunities to ask him questions. Okay.
I'm very honored to be here. I feel ever since I was given that Xerox copy of the art diary of Takuichi Fujii, it seemed to me that I had a responsibility. I shouldn't just keep that to myself. Go back. Okay, go back one.
We're trying to get there.
Okay. Well, Sandy Kita is an expert on Japanese art, especially Japanese prints. He grew up in Chicago, and after his father died, he spent a lot of time with his grandfather, who lived on Larrabee Street, right across the street from Cabrini Green. And so he has spent a lot of time with his grandfather. His grandfather was the first person to give him any lessons on art. Now, I'm trying to do this without notes. I don't want to read to you, I want to talk to you. But Alice, thank you very much for having me. And I want to thank Gloria for introducing me to Sandy Kita, otherwise that doesn't happen. And Lawson Inada, as Alice said, was my teacher in the early 80s, before I went to graduate school. He was the first person to suggest to me that you could use ancient Chinese and Chinese forms in writing modern poetry. And of course, I would go to graduate school and find out that many people knew this, but Lawson was the first person to teach me this. Lawson is a giant, helped to invent Asian American literature. His book, Legends of Camp, was the first book to win a major award. And he created the first anthology of Asian American literature with Frank Chin and Jeffrey Chan and Sean Wong. So he's a giant, but I didn't know at the time. He was a guy who just kind of stomped in his cowboy boots and complained about joggers going by his house. And his first ambition was to be a jazz bass player, and so he talked like a beatnik. And I had no idea what he would do for American literature in his gathering together and creating a literature that is Japanese American. This is the cover of Fujii. If you could go to the next slide, Steve. This is the cover. And this is the undercover cover. That is, this is the cover of the book that the diary is contained in, this clip and notebook. Now, Roger Daniels is one of the foremost historians of the incarceration and of American history of immigration. And about this book, he said, it's the most remarkable document created by a Japanese American prisoner during the wartime incarceration. I'm not qualified to say if he's right or wrong, but I don't think he goes far enough, because it's more than a document. It's a book, very carefully composed book. Not only is it a book, it's a particular kind of book. It's an art diary. The Japanese word, I may mispronounce it, iniki, okay? And it has a long tradition in Japanese culture. It also connects to travel journals, such as Basho wrote, because it is the story of a journey that is both physical and emotional and spiritual. I think he's right to say it's the most detailed and informative work produced by an EC prisoner in a war relocation authority. This is also part of what makes this really important. And it's not yet in print. There needs to be a facsimile edition. Sandy Kita, when he found it in a box in his mother's closet after she died, he worked with Hando Shoujo, who worked at the Library of Congress, to translate it and annotate it. So the copy I have has each page spread has Japanese commentary on one side and an image on the other, until the very end of the book. Let's turn to the next page, please. So this is Fujii. This is a photograph of him in Lincoln Park. He came to the United States in 1905 as a 15-year-old. And his father was already here, his brother was already here. He was in Chicago, and he took a number of jobs and operated a number of businesses in Seattle, including he had a retail fish store. He worked in fisheries. He came to Chicago, I think, in 1937, His grandson doesn't know exactly why, but he did connect with art circles here, and he did show his art in 1937 at an exhibit. Then he went back to Seattle shortly before the war. He and his wife were operating a flower shop on Yesler Avenue. I'll show you his drawing of it. But by the time the war broke out, he was one of a very select group of artists in Seattle that were representing the Northwest in the national art scene. He was part of a group called the Group of 12. Kenneth Callahan and Morris Graves were the two most famous members of this group. But Morris Graves and Callahan went on to have very significant roles in American art history. They were part of the Northwest School. But Fujii and Kenjiro Nomuro and Takuichi Fujii were the three Japanese artists, EC artists, in that group. Daniel says also in his introduction or foreword that this was probably the only interracial artist group then operating in America. Fujii showed his work all up and down the West Coast and was one of 10 Washington State artists to show his paintings in the first national exhibit of American art. So he had a very promising career ahead of him, which was interrupted by the war. When he was the one problem with his having come to Chicago in 1937 is that he missed out on an opportunity to have a solo exhibit at the Seattle Art Museum, which would have established his reputation. This is an image. My talk is called Drawing Breath, and it came to me writing a poem about this particular image, which is taken while he's in Puyallup, and I'll read that to you later. Okay, next slide, please. This is a self-portrait done in 1935, I believe, and this is the now, I'm not seeing all of the caption. I wonder if... Okay, it's okay. It's an untitled... It's fine. The church on the right is the Church of Good Help. It was in Nihomaki. Did I pronounce that close to correctly? Japantown, Nihomaki? Machi, thank you, Nihonmachi. His daughters, he has two daughters, and he sent them to Catholic schools, though he himself was a Pure Land Buddhist. And his notion was that to become American, you had to be Christian. And there are, I think, Christian imagery that appears consistently, but in a kind of quiet way in the diary. Next slide, please. This is one of his daughters. These are oil paintings. Most of what I will show you will be watercolors or pen and ink drawings. And there is an exhibit that has been traveling ever since his rediscovery in 2016 around the country. It would be wonderful if it came somehow to Chicago. But it's mostly the diary and then watercolors that come out of the diary. Next, please. So, as I said, it's not only a book, but it's a carefully composed book. These are end papers, and they had to be done after the diary was already started. Which is because you can see in the where Idaho appears that he has drawn a set of, I think, 4 or 5 barracks. And at the time, they didn't know where they were going. When he starts doing the diary, they don't know where they're headed. They wouldn't find that out until August. One of the Takuichi Fujii writes in his diary, which was not an art diary, that at a certain point they had to give up their cameras, their radios, and also their maps. So I've wondered if this putting a map right inside the cover of his book was an act of defiance, or an act of loyalty, or both. What it does is puts his family story clearly on the American map. And it is hand-drawn because English is his second language. They spoke Japanese in the home, and his spelling captures how his English might have sounded. Okay, so if you look at, this is Coronado. This is Florida. This is W, Virginia, no R. And I don't point this out to point out anything except when I saw this, I started to be able to hear him. And the diary is bilingual. It's bilingual in terms of language. It's bilingual in terms of art techniques. It is Japanese and American. He's misnamed Minnesota, Minneapolis. But these are all, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Minidoka, are all indigenous names, easy to mix up. His daughter actually went to work in a munitions plant in Minneapolis. And the East Coast, Connecticut doesn't appear on a map. Next slide, please.
I was going to interject, though, however, that his geographic sense is amazing.
Yes, yes.
And I don't think most American citizens nowadays could sit down and draw that.
No, and here's something else. You see, he calls it United State map. And so I hear United State, and then I see it broken in the spine. So there's a way that there's sort of implications. There's an artist behind this gesture. Next, please. He drew this to Idaho, and he put Seattle here, and he says, "Oh shoot!" So he puts Washington out in the Pacific there. But if you look at the art diary, the journals of Basho, they always include maps. The Toso diaries have maps. And so I think whenever he put this map in there, he already had a project in mind. And it was an important narrow road into his own interior. Next, please. These are end papers he did for the Minidoka interlude. Has anybody ever seen the Minidoka interlude? I have a copy in my car. It's only 15 minutes walk away from here. I brought it. If we take a break, I'll go get it. But it was a yearbook that they did in 1943. And it looks like a high school yearbook. I think it was the only camp that did this. It's a fascinating thing. They also have a timeline. But the end paper, these are end papers. All of these images come from his diary when he was in Puyallup at what's called Camp Harmony. These images are of Minidoka, and none of them are exactly in the diary. So he did different ones for this, or maybe he hadn't done those, but he had to know what Minidoka looked like and felt like to do that cover that I showed you. Next, please, Stephen. Okay, so he also did the chapter divisions in the Minidoka interlude. And this is, I believe, this is a men's room. And this is the reception center, and the entrance, and a barbed wire fence. On the left is a column called the Astor column from Portland, and it's the Smith Tower is on the right. These are two recognizable landmarks for the people from Portland and the people from Seattle who were sent from their state to be incarcerated at Minidoka in southern Idaho. And so he has this, so these are two, and I believe it may also be the Church of Good Help in the center. I think we see a steeple there. When Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams went to the camps, they were told, you cannot photograph armed guards or watchtowers or barbed wire, and somehow Fujii got away with it here because he shows them all. It could be that this magazine this yearbook got beyond the censors because by this point they realized this was not a dangerous group of people, and secondly, they thought it was just going to be for the people in the camp. But these yearbooks are available. You can purchase them from the Friends of Minidoka or the Minidoka Pilgrimage site. This is a wonderful map of this site. Next, Stephen, please. Oh, I just to see how These two covers are very similar with the inset. Here, this could be Fujii at a table. Number of beds could be the hospital because the barracks typically were smaller. And here you have a woman holding a child. And then you have Minidoka in the background. And so this is the first thing you see when you open up the page. And you see that XX? Sandy Kita, when he copyrighted this, called it the Art Diary of Takuichi Fujii, which is fine. But his grandfather called it Minidoka XX. Now, it doesn't have to do with Roman numerals. I went to a dictionary of slang in the 1930s. To be double X'd was to be double crossed. So I read the title, Minidoka Double Cross. And if you look at what Fujii shows us of the experience, it's clear that's what it means. And I'll show you, you'll see this double cross in the images. Next, please. At the pilgrimage, you can buy placemats that have this map. I mean, this is just nuts. I mean, this is crazy. But there's something I've come to understand that it's part of the survivors and their ancestors' practice to make something good of something very evil. So to have a placemat with a map where your grandparents were incarcerated, they sell. I had one and someone took it. But there are churches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are all blocks. Fujii lived in block 19. There are almost as many baseball fields as churches. And they're everywhere. And all that land has been reclaimed. And they were not only self-sufficient by the time they left, producing all their own food, but they were shipping it to other camps. And it was an experiment in socialism because nobody could profit from what was going on. Next, please. This is a frontispiece that I believe Fujii did long after he knew what this book was about. It comes right at the beginning with a watercolor of his shop on Yesler Way in Seattle. You've seen many, many photographs of families with their suitcases and their surnames on them. What does Fujii do? He puts Ma on his wife's suitcase and Pa on his suitcase, and then his daughter's first names on their suitcases. So one of the first things that happens when you look into this diary is he's playing with the experience a little bit, injecting some humor from the very get-go. Or maybe it is, this is what our daughters called us, Mom and Pa. And maybe we call our daughters by their first names. And so it was taking the experience and making it personal and familial. And they're all dressed up. Okay, so this is the first diary entry. If you were looking at the diary, the text is right here across the spine. 13 Avenue, Yesler Way. Sandy Kita in his note saying this is an early example of his grandfather's Japlish, okay? Because it's Yesler Way. And Mary Rose Flores, Mary Rose was the English name they gave to their elder daughter, Sandy's mother. And what you see is someone looking at that post. And this is one of the first watercolors he did of how it was that people in the Seattle community first got the news. And you see the word notice up there, and you see Japanese ancestry. I mean, you can read it. Next, please. And this was a poster from Washington, and this couple is finding out that their lives have been disrupted or ruined, clearly interrupted. And in the yearbook, they call it an interlude. Next, please. I learned from Sandy Kita's annotation that these characters tell us that we're in the Japanese Commerce building or meeting. And so what is happening is that these people are being registered and disenfranchised in the room that they used, their community used for commerce. So, and this is the first armed guard that you see in the diary, and this is even before the people have been removed. Now, the book I'm writing is poetry and prose in response to this, my journey through the book. And so the title for this poem is From Takuichi's 26 Views of a Barbed Wire Fence #1. And I'm playing off the tradition of the ukiyo-e printers who did the 52 stations of the Tokai or the 26 versions of Mount Fuji. And the poem reads, and so Fujii's, Kita's translation of Fujii's commentary is, we arrived at the assembly center at Puyallup. Those who had been sent earlier greeted us from inside the barbed wire. I write, look how the world begins to tip when the bus arrives. How the fence stretches like a net for everyone pouring into it. How it leans against the bus, how the barracks slide closer. Only the white plume of a tree stands straight, tall, and oblivious. Next. So, this is number 2 from Takuichi Fujii's 26 Views of Barbed Wire Fence. You'll notice here, barbed wire, armed guard, barrack, machine gun. The perspective doesn't seem correct from a sort of Western point of view because he's emphasized the size of the soldier, and the machine gun is much larger than it's the sentry that's walking by. This is not a deficiency in his art. He will often manipulate perspective so that it's not just what you see, but it's how you feel from what you see. Next, please, Stephen. The cattle stall. Let us check around. Peeking behind and back, there was a tall barbed wire fence. Above the green grass of the pasture beyond, a machine gun was placed. Next to it were some soldiers sleeping and some more training. When it becomes war, do people become wretched like this? Thinking about that, I felt wretched. Next, please. So one of the things that you will notice if and when you get a chance to have your own copy of this diary is how often he comes back to the same themes. This is a scene from the north, this is from the south. There's similarity and difference. But here you see the guard tower, the fence, the barracks, the surveillance lights, and notice this, the support structure, double X. Double X. Always. Next, please. I call them prison pastorals. A pastoral is a pleasant scene with sheep and goats, and it's a productive, manipulated landscape. But in Fujii's case, you're looking at it through barbed wire. So oftentimes it's like we see on the left, but on the right, this was the annotation says that this is an announcement from General DeWitt. Now, can you read this word? Anyone? Notice. Notice. You notice there's an E missing, but it's a silent E. Who needs it? You can read it, right? Okay. So what do you notice? You can notice the house in the background. It's a formidable fence. It's wood, it's wire, it's braced. Now let's look at the next one. Okay, here's again, X marks the spot, over and over. So this is one of the first watercolors he does of a number based on these images in the diary. Next, please. Okay. So he's got the E, and you realize that it's English on the left, Japanese on the right. And what a fence. You've got a big building in the background. I take it to be farmland. Puyallup is an area where there were lots of Japanese farmers. In fact, Puyallup was developed by Japanese farmers. So you're looking out through a fence at farmland, very productive farmland that Japanese farmers had produced. And the cows on the outside. That's the great irony. Here's two more. The one on the right is going to go to the Smithsonian Institute. And he actually signed his name on the bottom on this rail. Fujii, which would suggest he was finished. It's darker. But you'll notice the fence is probably, he's probably telling you a history of this fence. This area, perfectly sufficient for a corral. This barbed wire, added later. And this brace, if you see how, if you can just imagine how this fence proceeds, there's that X again. Okay? Double X. That's the great, I think that's the visual pun he's working with there. Next, please. At some points he goes to a horizontal format. Here we're seeing the sides of various barracks. That particular bucket is there. These are probably cattle stalls. And this is probably an oat bucket or a fire bucket because everything's made of wood. Next one, please. And see, there he puts the American flag. Now, what does this mean? Is this about his own loyalty? Or is this about the great irony and contradiction of this? And there is a man here, and he's either holding a broom or a gun. But he seems to be inside the fence. So I'm betting broom. The American flag appears in a number of places. This is probably the image, the barrack, barbed wire, X marks the spot. This is probably the one he worked hardest on. And again, all of this is happening at Camp Harmony, Puyallup, Western Washington Fairgrounds. There's a very good book by Barbara Johns on Fujii, and she makes the point that throughout the diary, the first half of the diary, well, she makes a claim for the whole diary. I would say it's especially true in Puyallup, that he never forgets about his confinement. And this shows us the kind of the claustrophobia that one, I mean, you feel that. Also, you can see this is a fence that's outside this larger fence. So he wants us to see these fences and he wants us to know this history. Next, please. This is, okay, so some of these are very, very quick sketches. But this particular image, I think, has been very, very carefully composed. Where's your eye drawn? Where?
To the person with the racket.
Yes. And where does that racket point? Out away. I see it kind of bisecting here, right? And this diagonal leads us that way, and this diagonal leads us that way. And of course, this person is watching. And so I think he's designed it very carefully to see that kind of convergence of badminton racket and bayonet. I see it as a reworking of something out of the book of Isaiah, swords into plowshares, but here it's bayonets into badminton rackets. But I think you really see the absurdity of the situation, the cruelty and the absurdity, that normal life is two girls playing a racket game while an armed soldier walks by. Normal life is, or something like normal life is happening under guard. In the background, you have a large farm and a silo, and you have animals grazing. This is Thomas Jefferson's American dream, seen through barbed wire. The contradiction is so powerful for me. Next, please. So this is another poem. Listen, as a century passes and time too tick-tock, his steps across the gravel rhyming with the pick-pock of the shuttlecock. One girl hits it, now the other. A sound like flat stones dropping into a pool of old men's voices. There's also something, the barbed wire fence could become the badminton net in a different world. Let's start another one. This is a very powerful image also of Puyallup. You have little boys playing marbles. Their mothers are looking after them. And in the background, this is the only time where people are talking through that fence. These could be Seattle neighbors. One more, please. So, as I said, Fujii is absolutely uncensored. He shows us the guards. Here he shows us the men's latrine. And this is only the first time he takes us into the men's latrine. The men's latrine is a place where rumors are spread, and he takes us in there. Here he shows a man pushing a woman out a window after some sort of hanky-panky. And in the next slide, people observe a man beating his wife with a stick. This was stressful. And Fujii is unapologetic in showing us everything and taking us everywhere, if it means going into the shower rooms. Okay, next please. Here are images of the guards. Now this image here on the left, when I saw this, I was convinced this is a master artist, because what he's doing, he has combined different points of view here. These characters should be bigger than the guards, but he's shrunk them. And he's put them in a small group. We see their vulnerability. We see their fragility. And then this guard looms, and you've got another net here. You know, they were at Puyallup. They were not only confined, but they were confined within their sections. You had to go through various gates to get from section A to section B. The next image is people gathered at early in the morning to salute the flag. And I love the detail of the doffed hats in the back. And you can't read anyone's face, so you don't know, is this out of respect? Is this forced upon them? You just can't decide. There's lots of ambiguity. The flag is very limp. And you see the silhouette of the guard. You see the separation between these military people and the people. And then you see someone on the outside just sort of walking by. There's a way that he treats these situations with a kind of calm that I don't know how to talk about exactly. And then you see a kind of ferociousness in the guard on the right. The scowl on his face is one quick line. And there's something snapping in the sky that for me just is a sign of the tension of this place. Next, please. One of the ways that Puyallup was different than Minidoka is that early on people have it's been a very, very traumatic experience, and people have been taken out of their jobs. And so you see people sitting around a lot. Not so at Minidoka. But here is an art exhibit in Puyallup. And Fujii has drawn the gallery and all the paintings, and he's captured this guard walking by. And you could mistake it for a painting, which of course it is. And when I was writing about this, I thought, yeah, he's captured his guard. We talk about that, how you really capture something, but it made me sort of recoil. He was, before he went to the camp, an urban scene painter. And he did 12 or 13 of these images showing the little streets, or the streets they called them, between these hastily constructed shanties. These are in the parking lot at Puyallup. Next, please. And I brought, let's see, there's an image, yeah, this image right here is a print of this watercolor. And I think in these images, there's a real sadness. But these doors look like the doors to the sheds my neighbors have to keep their lawnmowers in. These look so tiny, and this is where people are living. There's the X. I never saw that before. Okay, next one, Stephen, please. There's another image, but a different kind of feeling. And these watercolors that I'm showing you are sometimes about this big. And I got to go see a number of these photographs I took when I went to see what didn't get into the exhibit. Sandy and Terry Keita live in Virginia. And so I traveled there and took those photos, and I don't know if they know that I'm showing you. Don't take these and sell these, please, or they'll never trust me again. Next, please. Very early in the diary, after you've been to the latrine, after you've been to the dirty shower room, after you see Fujii's energy starting to flag in his paintings or his drawings, you have this group of girls, it looks like girls to me, playing volleyball, and no fences, no guards, no watchtowers. It's as if when people are fully engaged somehow, they might forget they're in prison. And they're all airborne. Here, Fujii has drawn himself. He climbed up onto his barracks to do another painting of the rooftops. In his artist statement from the 30s, he said the job of the artist is to take himself and the viewer to a higher existence. Here he makes a kind of a joke of it. Next, please. This is an Oban dance, and they've connected the lanterns to the barbed wire fence. So life going on. Next to it, an image of the young people dancing. He's constantly showing the Japanese, different generations doing different things that are recognizably Japanese, that are recognizably American. And he's got a very good eye for it. Next, please. Fairly soon there's a barbershop. People got to get haircuts. People are playing cards, but here you got the young people lying around. This seems scandalous to me, and I think Fujii is watching. I think this is Fujii. I think he's in the window here, and I think he's in the window here. Remember, he is a 50-year-old man with daughters growing up, and we've all heard many times how camp life was really hard on the family structure. And so he's showing this to us as he's seeing it. Next, please. So, my theory about Fujii is that the practice of his art was what got him through this experience. And so the poem reads, drawing breath, sketch after sketch, he is drawing himself out of there, out the open window and through the fence, past that barn in the distance and over the hill, like coal smoke up the chimney. He disappears. This particular image is fairly close to the time when they're leaving Puyallup. They find out they're going to Idaho. And he takes pleasure in how orderly the evacuation is. The second evacuation, or they call it evacuation. Second forced removal. Next, please, Stephen. He has a number of images both in the diary and in watercolors treating the trip from Puyallup to a isolated railroad siding in southern Idaho. And the photographers were not allowed onto the trains. You see people on the buses, on the trains, but you don't get onto them. So one of the ways that Fujii's account is different is that he takes us onto those trains. And he actually thought one day, all of a sudden, they're going to the dining car, and he thinks, why are they treating us nicely? He thought maybe they're going to take him off to kill them. It's the scariest moment. He makes a prayer. We have become bus people. In front, far off, we can see a water tank. Those water tanks are a feature of almost many of the drawings he does when he gets to Minidoka. There's now a visiting site. It's a National Historic Site. There's a visiting center. And Eric Shigaki, an activist from Seattle, worked with several others to create this large, large mural on the outside. And instead of having watchtowers, they have the water tower, because the water tower is a source of life. Next, please. Here he's putting his nameplate on his house. He's very, very active when they get to Minidoka. He wants to get things going. And here he notices, looking at his name, you see this is the only place his name appears in the diary. He appears twice. Once here. This is the first time. And his inscription is, indeed, this is an odd door. The lock is on the outside. I see that this relocation center is a prison. He's only just moved in. And this is another thing that makes the diary so important. He calls it as it is. He uses the language to describe it as prison, as incarceration. Here is an image of them setting up the beds. You can barely make out a bed spring here. There is a lot of ink in this image. And Sandy Kita points out that these were lit by one bare bulb, which you might see way up here. Fujii's very much in control here. This reminds me of certain etchings Rembrandt did of the Holy Family. But there's a lot of ink there. You can see the beams in the barrack structure and a little bit of light. Next, please. And here's a painting he did of the barracks. Next. When they arrived, the camp wasn't done. And so they're blasting. He said it sounded like a war zone. They're blasting to put in the sewer. You can see people still working on the barracks. They weren't ready for them. In fact, they didn't have the fence done, and so they asked the people to help them with the fence. But they didn't need a fence. It was too big for a fence, and there was nowhere to go. I mean, where are you going to go? The desert was a very, very scary place. Next, please. When they got there, because of the construction, there's a construction firm from Salt Lake, I believe. I looked it up. They did the Kennedy space pad. They did all these different things. I went to the webpage. No mention of Minidoka. But because of the construction, all of the undergrowth was uprooted. So the dust storms were horrific. And so this is the image that appears in the diary, and there's the watercolor that he did afterwards. It's apocalyptic. And then, or when it rained, it just turned into muck. And so he did some beautiful drawings of the reflections, both at Minidoka and at Puyallup. But again, you also get a sense of what a grim place this was. This is a temporarily quickly made men's bathroom. You see they've put planks down to walk on. And of course, this was the way people were treated, the indignity with people were treated. He gets that, he shows that, he records that. I believe this is an image that I think inspired the image on the right, which, next slide please. This is Captain Marvel from 1942 and Fujii's title page. These people are walking in step, and they're not marching to battle, but they're in step, marching through the muck of their lives, trying to have ordinary lives. If you go, can you go back, Stephen, on one? I love the fact this woman's holding this child by the hand, this child's going ahead, this person's getting a ride. It's not only about Fujii, it's about a community that kept their dignity. These are not superheroes, these are ordinary heroes. And to just go from day to day and provide a normal life as much as is possible for your kids, to make sure that there are schools and playgrounds, that's heroic in my book. Next, please. Oh, this is a carving Fujii did out of greasewood, and this is an ashtray to give you some sort of sense of its side. This was at the Kita's home in Virginia. And Kita's cousin described this as the Minidoka Madonna. And so I've come to think of this character here as the Minidoka Madonna. That on the cover of his book, he puts a woman holding a child, holding a baby. I mean, there's tenderness is preserved. It's a beautiful carving, too. Next, please. So he documents what it's like in this new world. And he'll take us to show us the boiler room. He'll show us the new sewer system. When the latrines actually come on plumbing, it was 6 months before they had real plumbing. So there was lots of dysentery. But here he has people waiting in long lines. And here's a group of people have come in, and more people are coming in. Next, please. Any baseball fans in the crowd? What are you looking at? He's sliding in, and this guy's standing at the plate. So what's going on?
Stealing home.
He's stealing home. I just delight in this image. Now, Dorothea Lange has photographs of people playing. Ansel Adams climbed up in a watchtower to take a photograph of people at Manzanar playing baseball. Fujii's got a man stealing home. It's the only time a person smiles in the diary. And so basically he's stolen on the pitcher, and the pitcher's left-handed, and everything is just perfect. He's pulled the backstop so we can see him coming in. But he's going to steal home safe. And that's just the dream. And this is the senior team. These are the easy. The carefree artist in the sunlight of a bright day, I'm sketching a scene of the camp. So there are no prison pastorals at Minidoka because there's nothing pastoral about Minidoka, which is not to say it's not beautiful. It's not to say he doesn't find things of beauty there. But and Fusana, his wife, is there, and they spend a lot of time in the desert together. And they they wouldn't never have as much time. She took on the flower shop so that he'd have more time for his art. Here in Minidoka, you see them frequently together. Next, please. So he does these large panoramas. I put one upstairs at the entrance. And then he does also the watercolors. And you see this is the hospital. And the guard towers don't appear as frequently. And the fence won't appear as frequently. I think you probably know that there is a firm that wants to put a wind farm on the footprint. And Friends of Minidoka are fighting that because they don't want anyone to go there and not see it as the desolate place it was when their parents and grandparents got there. Next, please. Huge. 7th largest city in Idaho, I think, at the time. 9,000 people. Next, please. This is one of the most dramatic images of a fence in the whole diary. It appears on the left, and and then the watercolor on the right. But notice how different they are in the sense that this is looking down on the scene and you don't see very far off, whereas in the watercolor, forever, the distance. You see barracks in the background and then clouds. This is one of the last images you'll see. I'll show you one more, but this is the most dramatic. But again, it's not like he's underneath looking at the barracks like the big wave of Hokusai. Instead, he's on top. He's risen above this somehow. But it is a stark image and somehow beautiful. Next. Yeah, these two are very, very different. I mean, in the sense that they're both about fence and containment. But he's above things here, whereas this is very claustrophobic space. Here, and what happens in the diary is all of a sudden, if you turn to the next one, Steve, he's on the desert. And for a while there, they electrified the fence, and the people got very, very angry, and then they took the juice off. And then people spent a lot of time in the desert. In fact, Fujii was bitten by a snake in the desert, and that's one of the episodes he records. A man was lost. He was going out looking for greasewood and got lost, and he was found dead of exposure. So here, and also, so what happens is the sense of confinement is replaced by a sense of abandonment, because again, people will start to leave the camps, and those people who are left are the elders and the little kids and families and so on and so forth. But here's one of his first images of the desert, of the sagebrush. Here's another image he has, and then we reprinted this particular image. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe had succeeded in making the desert artistically interesting to people. Fascinating, and a spiritual place, and a place very alive. Fujii's desert is also very alive, but we never forget how deadly it is. Here the snake is very obvious. You only see a little bit of them here. These are magpies. And if you go to the visitor center, there's magpies in the air. And apparently for the residents, the magpies were a great presence. Magpies can recognize their own reflection in a mirror. They're brilliant. And so they're making war on a snake. Now, he's very near Eden, Idaho. He gets bitten by a snake in Eden, Idaho. I mean, sorry. But it's a gorgeous painting. And again, this is about the reality of the desert. Next. And a still life he did. It looks very much like a Cezanne still life with the apples, with the outline and so on and so forth. But Cezanne never had a steer's skull. And of course, still life, I think it means morte, still life is in French or Italian is nature dead. This is just a tiny little watercolor, but I think it's gorgeous and so forlorn. It really captures the loneliness of the place. Next. It got down to 40 degrees below zero and up to 120 in the summer. And when they arrived, they had tar paper surrounding, pine. And I think they may have added to it wallboard. But they went through tons and tons of coal. And still it was very, very cold. And he gets that. Another wonderful, again, very tiny image that he painted. Next. Okay, so in January, they're pounding the mochi. Yes. And here's how it's represented in the diary. And below this, he reflects on the birds. Barbara John's book is called Hope for Another Springtime, and it's from a quote from the caption for this image. But one of the things that happens here is that the Nisi and the Isi are working together, and he records that. Early on, when the Nisi are telling the Isi where to go and what to do and so on and so forth, you can see resistance to that. Not here. These are summer images. I never thought before that home plate is called home plate. Is because it looks like home. Look at it. It's like a child's, and the image on the left, home plate there looks like a child's image of a house. Here, play structure, but lonely, kind of deserted. And you got the barracks in the background. If someone were to write a history of play structures in American prisons, that would be the frontispiece. On the left, you have kids swimming in a pool. There is a swimming pool at Minidoka. It was created after a person drowned in the canal. A boy lost his life in the canal. So they created a swimming pool. You could visit it. But this one, he used watercolor to make the water blue. You can barely make it out. I didn't take that photograph. And here they're out in the desert, and there's sunflowers everywhere. And I don't know what to make of that. They're working all the time. And what's interesting is after they left, all this land, the barracks were sold for nothing, and people hauled them off. And the land was auctioned off. No, it was put in a lottery for returning veterans, but no Japanese American veterans. But here, this image, they're knocking down the sagebrush to put in a ball field. And so this is fairly toward the end. And you see, there's the water tower in the background. They would let the kids out of school for the harvest. Next, please. But then again, you have a cemetery. And this is the image that appears in the diary, and then a watercolor he did subsequently. And he records in the diary several funerals. And what's interesting, what makes his story account very different than others I'm familiar with is Minidoka was a fairly peaceful, highly functioning camp. What violence happened was after they decided to close the camps. That's when all the anxiety came. And his treatment of the end is unlike any I know. Next. This drawing is the only one I'm aware of that was a copy of a photograph in the camp newspaper called The Hunt Irrigator. And I believe it appeared in the newspaper because there was a coal carrier strike. And so I think the camp stance was this was a bad strike. We shouldn't let this happen. So he writes, or the translation Sandy provides is, the supply of coal was cut and people in the camp were greatly inconvenienced. Of what had been a mountain of coal, there is now hardly enough to pick any up. You'll notice those other images I was showing you were of double images. And I think at a certain point he didn't know how long the war was going to last or how many pages he had left in his book. I don't think he wanted to go into a different book. But here he used a whole page for this image. Next. Now, here's a crazy thing. This is what a page spread looks at. This is my photograph of a Xerox. But in the Densho copy that is traveling, you also see this. This image comes through from the underside of the page spread. Her ghostly presence comes through. Now what's happening on the left, those are young people going off to war. And these are the uniforms that people are modeling. And so Fujii has written the inscription for that image about the people going off to war across the small of her back and down her hip and down her leg. And I don't know if he was in command of this, but the pages must have been thin. And for me, it's the most haunting image in the book. That these people are going off to war and their grandmother, their mother, their aunt is scrambling for coal. Next, please. This is the only portrait that appears in the diary. And she is named. It's his neighbor, Sushan. And this is a huge moth that he identified with its Latin name in a previous page. And so it's coming through the way the image of the woman comes through. I've always been intrigued by the eye that you see on the right of her face, her left eye. It looks flat. It looks dull. It's somehow something's wrong there. And I've speculated. I write poems, right? So I've thought about there's this. He's showing something that happened to a girl because she was in camp. She's very shy. You can see how she kind of hides her hands. And I imagine him hurrying himself with her hair. Okay, next one. After the image of the little girl, he stops writing any captions, any titles, any commentary. It's wordless. Although there's sound, these people have somehow got a radio, and they're listening to a radio. The image up above, those sunflowers now are, the people are stooped over, the sunflowers are stooped over. It's a time of sadness, excitement, fear. And on the right, that's the last image of Takuichi Fujii and his wife Fusana in the camp, and I'll show you a larger image of it. It's October 2nd, 1945. Fujii told his grandson they kicked him out. They evicted him for the third time because he had nowhere to go. He couldn't go back to Seattle. And then on the bottom, remember in the earliest posters, they say, you can't bring your pets. These are all these sort of animals they've somehow adopted who were left behind. I've not seen this anywhere else. They're fighting for food scraps. Next. So this is the last night. Their bags are packed. They've been served eviction notices. And the light comes in flooding like, I compare it to a Pharisee's pinstripe shirt. So, there's where they settled. Fujii and his two daughters both ended up back in Chicago. This is Larrabee Street. I've been there. The remains, in front, it's all vacant. Doesn't look like that. It's been gentrified. But Sandy Kita and his mother lived downstairs, and Fujii, his grandfather, lived upstairs. Anyway, I thank you very much for your patience. I've gone on for hours, but I never have had a chance to do this. I'm happy to bring Fujii home, if in my little way. So thank you. Images from his backyard. Oh, one more image. I'm sorry, Stephen. One more. He became an abstract artist. He worked and basically this is what was going on at the time, and he became very good at it. And this is the one that Sandy and Terry donated to the Broward Museum of Art. And it's not that big, but it's big. And the brush, he couldn't find a brush expressive enough, so the brush was made of his wife's hair. Big, big brush, and you can see the motion. So he continued his art to the rest of his life. He died, I believe, of stomach cancer, but was a great grandfather to his son, my friend Sandy Kita. Okay. Questions or comments?
Were there any stories in the diary, or is it just commentary?
It's just actually it's sometimes just a name, like View from the Southwest. One narrative is when he and his wife are out and he gets bit by a snake and he has to go to the hospital. And he does his first abstract painting of what it felt like. It's a kind of crazy image. But he tells the story of the man who was lost and how they organized a search party and went out and didn't find him. And it's largely about just living day to day in the camp. And sometimes they're playing, and sometimes they're working, and sometimes they're lonely, and sometimes, Lasanada said it's a whole human condition. Yes?
Well, that notebook, it's called Clip and note.
Yes,
And there's some writing on it. That's a notebook you pick up in a stationery store?
I think so.
How many pages were actually in it?
I think there's like 258 or something. I mean, I didn't bring my. I have the Xerox copy in a binder. The cover of the binder broke off. Otherwise, I would have brought it. I spent all the time looking at it.
And how many watercolors did he do later? Those were done after camp, I assume.
These are probably done in the camp.
They were done in
We
camp.
have, there are images, photographs of him displaying his art in Minidoka and also in Twin Falls. So he was doing something, we think most of these in the camp.
They're not dated then?
No,
Okay.
no. Very hard to put together his history because this is what he left behind.
You mentioned the yearbook
Yeah.
that we purchased.
Yeah, I will send Alice the information about Minidoka interlude. It's fascinating. Yeah, everybody's photographs in all the different groups, and you see how carefully constructed the community was. You know, the different teams, and you know, all kinds of different activities that are, you know, the bone dance, the sumo wrestling, and baseball and basketball, everything.
And they did that more than that 1 year you showed. They did one every year.
No, they only did it one time.
Only one
The
time.
interlude, yeah. I'm sorry, yes, I should have brought it. Sorry. I was forgetting.
I'm all.
Lindor, yes.
Is the interlude in the digital repository at Densho?
It might be, but I don't know. But I can find that out very easily.
Wonderful.
But it's a beautiful, it was constructed years ago, and I bought myself a copy, and I just think it's, you know, to teach about the camp, it's just an incredible resource. And you know, you can identify who is in which blocks, which barrack in which block. Fascinating.
I have a question.
Yes.
I haven't seen a lot of these before, so a lot of this is new to me too. But when they were on the tractors and stuff like that, and plowing and working, is that when they're helping the local people with the beet harvest, or is that doing their own?
No, sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's in the camp. But they also saved the Idaho beet crop, and they were also working harvesting beets near Salt Lake. But I mean, they just that map, all the different things that they were growing. I mean, when the food was horrible in the assembly centers. You know, Vienna sausage and, you know, wiener.
Provided like them, the tractor to use.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The equipment was provided. Yes. And I guess you know, Sears Roebuck was very busy supplying people with everything they needed that they could order. And there's in the Minidoka interlude, there's a place where it says when Japanese prints were outlawed, you know, it's just crazy. But then again, there was a library, and Fujii has a beautiful moment where he said, you know, these beautiful books, they make me so sad because they're in prison with him. But you know, there's some very sweet and tender moments. Yeah, the library. But that map, all the different churches and the ball fields and the schools, and it's quite amazing. And the thing is, then I don't know if it was the government trying to cover their tracks, that all of a sudden the barracks are gone, and then you know, basically that reception center is made out of stone, and so that remained. But they did an archaeological dig at Minidoka and found an important garden that had been constructed there, and there's a barracks, there's a mess hall, there's the fire station which was there, and the huge base of the water tower is near the fire station. You can see that, but the towers are gone. Are there questions? Anyway. Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Are any of you from Minidoka? Were you in Minidoka?
My father.
Your father was in Minidoka. Usually usually if you knew what camp they were from, then you knew where they were before the war. So usually people there were in Seattle. If you knew that, they even knew where they came from in Japan, like that. You know?
Yeah.
But what I was impressed with the sheer number of drawings. I mean, I expected to see paintings, but I didn't expect to see this many. And I have to say, you really studied it. You know, I mean, we can look at pictures, but to get as much as he's gotten out of it, you have to have studied the pictures and really gotten to know the topic very well. So yes.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. I mean, I can't pronounce Japanese. I can't read it, and this is not my story. And so I want to be very careful that this is, you know, Lawson told me to write you, and Sandy said, teach this and write about it. And so I'm taking directions, and I realize I hope I don't seem not humble enough, because this is not my experience. The first person of color I ever met as a boy was a man named Wally Takamoto, who my dad said was the god of carburetors. And he was this tall, and he was up to his elbows in grease. And it was only after studying this story I thought, well, how did Wally Takamoto get to Minneapolis? Wally Takamoto came from Hawaii. I traced him to a women's auxiliary newsletter in Hawaii. He was an officer with the 100th Fighting Group. He was a war hero, and I thought he worked on carburetors, which he did. But he raised a son who went to Tulane or Vanderbilt, and all this was available by just digging around on the web. But you know, you just don't know what you don't know most of your life. Yes?
So the JACL in Minneapolis did sponsor an exhibit called Courage and Compassion, and that was about 5 years ago. That exhibit traveled across the country, and each locale told its own story.
Oh.
So Oberlin, where I went to college, told the Oberlin story. It came to Chicago, he told the Chicago story. So I'm sure that among the Japanese American community in Minneapolis, you can get a lot.
I bet that's true. Yes. Anything else? Did I get anything really wrong? If you could very politely tell me before I go so I don't make a mistake again. Nise. Ise, Nise.
Yeah, and then the dance is Obon.
Obon?
Yeah.
Nise, Ise. Thank you. Hey.
But I wanted to thank people who helped us. So I wanted to, Mike Tanimura, all of the postcards, all of the drawings comes from him. And Stan was doing the technology, and we really need help with it. And Jesse did the exhibit upstairs on the video, the photo. It looks very nice. And Mary, Joy, and Gwen Kato did the registration. So we're really grateful, and we're really grateful to Stephen and the library. Thank you very much for coming.